I think a lot about like what COVID did in terms of changing the narrative of how we talk about our health. So there was such a stigma associated with mental health. We talk about what we do as providing psychosocial support to people touched by cancer. And really what that is that we are providing an opportunity for people to look after themselves and to take care of their mental health and to figure out what it is that they need, because the emotional impact of a cancer diagnosis is profound.
Welcome to the Fifi Uncensored podcast, episode 27, part 1, with our guest, Jenna Benn SherSher, who created the nonprofit Twist Out Cancer. And I am super excited to introduce Jenna and her nonprofit program, which has touched nearly 250,000 people in the last decade, and the why we were connected through a mutual friend, and how our conversation through this connection was a very cathartic, enlightening, and validating conversation that I look forward to sharing with you. So pull up that chair, grab that coffee and cannoli, because here we go.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Crazy, but
I love your room, by the way.
Oh, thanks. It's a little bit crazy in here. That's what happened during COVID. Oh, you've got a fun bookshelf too.
Well, it's funny because, I do this on my iPad versus my computer, and the lens does a strange kind of thing. And normally I would just square off. I actually have a sound studio, but we cannot get the internet out there.
Oh no.
For my studio, my sound booth, everything, which is why I don't Zoom it and why I don't do my podcast out there. So it's always kind of like, this configuration always makes me laugh, and I go, whatever, who cares?
Yeah, who cares?
Like, it's not about that.
Right. That's so funny.
It is funny. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm tired today. That's okay. My daughter, Lilu, the 2-year-old, is having a sleep regression all week. So it's just been a rough week. I think I'm just tired from waking up every couple hours with her screaming for me.
Oh, babe.
It's okay. It's just part of whatever. It's part of it. And my husband got caught in the operating room and slept there last night. So it was just one of those nights that was right off. It's just up a bunch, but it's okay. I'm here.
It's funny. I just call like life an algorithm. We think of algorithms with like computers and social media and all that. But the truth is, an algorithm is like the listening to our own, like how we flow through all the things that we're faced with, right? And like we just went through a full moon, for instance, which shifts a lot of people, whether they pay attention to it or not. And it does affect all of us. And anyhow, so, energetically, your baby feels it, you feel it, the way things at work are affected, like,
yes,
whether we're paying attention or not is a whole nother thing. And I get woken up by 15-month-old boy puppies.
Oh,
in the middle of the night to go to the bedroom.
Oh, and that's like, fun.
Pillows in the face and big paws in the face, and like, yeah, it's, and it's interesting during recovery, because technically I'm still recovering, and I just find, like, for a person who's been waking up between 2:30 and 5:30 for years for work, I right now want to cling to the pillow until like 8 in the morning.
That's so nice.
Well, it's only allowed right now because our whole industry, not whole industry, but most of the industry is on strike.
Yeah.
And so it makes for a crazy moment of time right now. So anyhow, listen, I want to start off by saying thank you, Jenna, for joining me on this podcast. And how we were introduced was through a mutual friend of ours, Sharon, who I refer to as Sharon Mendelson, because that's how I know Sharon from when we were kids at summer camp. And she knew of both of our stories through mutual, her interactions with us. And you and I connected, and through our connecting, we realized like how much, not so much that, yeah, we had in common, but the reason why we wanted to continue this conversation together. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what I remember from our initial meeting was that you had gone through cancer, which was a rare cancer, and back in 2011. And it's interesting because that's when I was going through thyroid cancer, and through that, and through your writing and reaching out and telling your story, did Twist Out Cancer, your nonprofit, get launched. And since you've been able to help a lot of people tell their stories, and why I wanted to connect, because it's interesting. I didn't even realize that this is like the month of cancer awareness or survivors or whatever. And I thought about it because I thought, wow, going through thyroid cancer 4 times, I never even like aligned with things like that. And strangely, going through ovarian cancer is kind of just like, why am I more aware of that today than I was back then?
So why?
I'm not really sure, other than I think this cancer affected me differently. It affected me physically, emotionally. It affected my work where I couldn't work. I think it just, and I was also more public about it, but also like 2011, there was an engagement in social media. And even though I was a news junkie, there wasn't this, there's just different levels of many more platforms, I think, of like that information coming at you. So I don't know. And maybe in 2011, that wasn't being spoken of in the same way. I just don't know. I mean, I'd have to do research to go back 12 years to say, why didn't I? But I mean, even between 2011 and 2016, that just was never. And I have to be frank, like talking about my cancer back then, I found that in the communities that had any sense of awareness, I remember not feeling loved on. And I think I'm a very lovable person. It sounds very weird, but I didn't feel the love and the support. I'm certainly from my family and my immediate friends, but from communities like workspaces and stuff, no. And it was weird because I wasn't in a woe me space. I just felt like you couldn't talk about it. Whereas I'd witnessed other people, whether they were going through breast cancer or whatever, where people would like lob onto them. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting, because I've always been that very nurturing energy and people that, I cared for. And it was a very confusing time that way going through it. So I felt very like, I remember saying to a girlfriend that went through breast cancer right at the beginning of the pandemic, like, you were lucky that so many people like made you feel okay and welcome and didn't shun you. That my feeling was, and my experience was otherwise. And so I didn't feel safe talking about it. And this time I said to myself, no, I have something to share, to teach people as an advocate. And I'm not going to let that get in my way, because I know who I am and I know my value. And I also don't welcome that kind of energy in my life. And it's a weird thing to publicly say out loud, but that's my truth. And I can't explain why other people act the way they do. But that was my experience. I remember in 2016, my very last surgery, I was heading up a show. We were working in the middle of the mountains and triple digit heat. And I mean, I was leading a team and designing a show and taking care of the leads. And I remember I had to tell my surgeons that they had to figure out how to do my surgery on a Friday Memorial weekend so I could be back to work on a Tuesday. And they were like, no, you can't do that. And I said, this will be my fourth surgery in 5 years. I know how I can recover. Those producers don't want to hear that I'm not going to be available and I will lose a 6-figure income, and so will my team, and I can't have that happen. And they were just like, I mean, I think they went la, 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 la. And I was right back in triple digit heat in the middle of the mountains on a Tuesday morning after a major surgery that I never should have been, but I was. And working in an industry that has very little loyalty, it makes for a very confusing kind of path when you're very clear and very visionary and very like I said, I'm an advocate. I help people. I help heal people. I help make people feel good. So it's, I can't explain it other than those are not the right people to be aligned with.
It's good lessons you've learned, I think, from this.
Well, I think it's an interesting, I think it's good lessons too. It's not even that you think that you personally are seeking out these lessons. I think it's environments that people look at. Now we're talking about Hollywood or the entertainment industry that people want to glob to or have fascination with. They do not know the inner sanctum of the world behind the curtain. And what and sadly what comes with that.
Well, I'm so happy that you're being outspoken now about it.
Thank you. So I want to hear about you and share with you who you are and how you came to, create Twist Out Cancer and and how you found that being a purpose.
Yeah, well, I think about, there's a lot that we talked about privately before doing this. And I think it's just interesting. What we were just talking about just made me think about a lot of things. So I'm sorry if I was quiet, but I was sort of processing what you were saying. I think it's just interesting, like when we choose to speak out and what we choose to speak out about. And I think that the things that we deal with in our lives end up leading us into the direction of where we're supposed to be, right? So you didn't speak out then because you didn't feel like you could, or it wasn't the right time, but now is the right time. And so what happened between then and now that created this sort of scenario where you felt like you needed to find your voice and have found your voice, right? So when I was diagnosed with cancer, I was 29. I was working at the Anti-Defamation League, big civil rights firm, and I was advocating about anti-Semitism and, speaking out about hate crimes, and was like a real activist in the community. And about 4 years into my work there, I was diagnosed with Gray's lymphoma, which is this super rare blood cancer that at the time there were about 200 cases worldwide. And I knew that I was sick a couple months prior because I kept going into the doctor complaining of flu-like symptoms, started to lose weight. It eventually got so bad that I was having trouble breathing. And so I kept going back to my primary, who kept saying, you have the flu. And it was only when I was having trouble breathing that I then went to the orthopedist, who had the wherewithal to do a CT scan and then found a ton of tumors in my chest. And I was young and I was otherwise healthy. I had no other health issues. So I understand why I was overlooked and sort of pushed aside. And I listened to my body and I advocated for myself, and I didn't take what they were saying to me to heart. I knew that there was something else going on. And so started turned from my advocate hat at ADL to advocating for Jenna. And it was a new sort of space for me to be in, quite honestly. I wasn't so comfortable advocating for myself and had to get comfortable. And thank goodness that I did, because, things happened very quickly after that. Once they realized that I had these tumors in my chest, they thought I had Hodgkin's lymphoma. And I was lucky at the time. I ended up meeting with the Oncofertility Consortium at Northwestern, which is this leading institution for fertility, specifically with cancer patients. They happened to be at the hospital where I was looking to get treatment. And, it was during the holidays, so I wasn't able to get into the oncologist right away to figure out what kind of cancer I had, but I was able to get in to discuss my fertility. So before I even knew what kind of cancer I had, I was already learning about fertility preservation, what I could or couldn't do, what the risks were. And so for me, I think it's important, because the way that I was thinking about cancer, the first part of my cancer journey after knowing that I had cancer was thinking about life after cancer, which was a huge luxury. Even though at the time I didn't know if I was going to be eligible, right? But I was immediately thinking to myself, no, this is not the end for me. This will be a chapter in my story, and I will go on and will do everything I can to bring life into this world. It was so important to me. So I started creating my binders and learned all about fertility preservation. And then by the time that I went and saw my oncologist, I already had my appointment set up, hoping that I'd be able to go ahead and do it. And they agreed that it was a good idea. And in that time, so they had diagnosed me with Hodgkin's lymphoma based on the biopsy. But my oncologist said, let's send this out and get another read on it. And while I was going through that month of egg preservation, my diagnosis changed. And so in some ways, preserving my fertility saved my life, because I was diagnosed with a much more serious blood cancer that was super rare, that required a much heavier duty treatment. And it was because I had spent a month opting to preserve my fertility and not start chemotherapy right away. And unfortunately, with gray zone lymphoma survivors, even though there's few of us, we often hear about relapse because they are misdiagnosed with Hodgkin. So they're undertreated, it comes back, and then they have to go through much more intensive treatment. And so I felt very lucky that I was pragmatic and had this opportunity for more testing and could be thoughtful about it. And so it was kind of a crazy situation, but I went through an egg harvest, preserved my fertility, not knowing what I was going to do with it or what was happening. And then the next day went in for 6 days of chemo inpatient at Northwestern. Yeah, it was really crazy. So I was treated there for about 6 months and then developed a really horrible case of sepsis that nearly cost me my life, right as I was getting back to get ready for work. And then I had to start over. So it was nuts. It was a crazy period of time. I was 29, 30 years old at the time. I was sort of in the prime of my life. I knew no one else like me that had gone through something similar, until I started really immersing myself in the community. And then I met other young people like me, which made a huge difference, because, cancer to me was an old person's disease. It was something you got in your 80s. It wasn't something you got when you were 29, 30 years old. I knew a couple of kids that had passed away, from pediatric cancer, growing up, but it's still, my thinking about it was always that this is something that would probably happen to me when I'm in my 80s, So building community and connecting with others was very much top of mind for me, going through treatment, because I felt so isolated and lonely. I didn't know anyone else with my disease. It just was really desperate to connect with other people that understood that. And I really couldn't relate to my friends and family anymore, quite honestly. I mean, I was confronting my own mortality and not sure if I was going to live to the next decade, right? So it was a challenging spot to be in. And so I just started writing and documented what I was going through. And the more that I shared, the more the world seemed to open up and started trusting me with secrets and things that people were holding on to that they felt were relatable to what I was writing about. And And it was a very powerful experience to be open and vulnerable and honest, and then taking on other people's vulnerabilities at the same time. It felt like this sort of even exchange of I said I felt like I was a keeper of secrets. That's what it really felt like to me. It was kind of a beautiful thing. And then I decided to put out a call to action in the middle of treatment and asked for people to join me on the dance floor to do the twist, because the twist was the only dance move that I could do at the time that I felt up for, and put a really like horrible video up. And within a couple of days, we had a couple thousand people twisting out cancer. And so that's where the name Twist Out Cancer comes from. And since then, since I got out and since I, went through this totally life-changing experience, I learned a lot in the process of going through this, and really took a lot of notes. and I really wanted to be able to give back to the community that had been so generous to me. And I wanted to provide support to people that were going through cancer or had gone through it. And I felt that there was this sort of shaming that happens with a cancer diagnosis for a lot of people. Yeah. Right. I mean, there's like this tendency to retreat. And I think when we don't talk about what's hard, we can feel a sense of shame. But what did we actually do to deserve this? There's nothing that we did. So why are we feeling shame about it? It made no sense to me. So I think that was a big motivator for me to be very vocal and outspoken about my experience, because I didn't want to feel shame. And I didn't want other people to feel shame. And I saw this sort of ripple effect by being open and honest. It gave people permission to do the same. And so Twist is really at the heart focused on that storytelling and on empowering people to come forward with their stories, to share what they've gone through or what they're going through, and allow the community to then in turn be able to give back to them. So everything that we do is creative arts focused and about empowering people to come forward with their stories. So we run a bunch of programs that are art therapy focused, and it's been beautiful. It's been a crazy ride.
Yeah, no, it's incredible to again hear your story and your path, because there are all these little bullet points along your path that resonate with me. So kind of working backwards, I love that it's through the creative arts that you help people tell their story, being an artist all my life. The shame is what I was referencing to before regarding the thyroid cancer. That's exactly how I felt. That was exactly how I felt. And it was interesting. Never once was my work interrupted going through the 4 bouts. I was always showing up. I didn't lose my hair. Yeah, I had cuts across my neck, like big staples, like a Frankenstein look, 4 times, 3 across the base of my neck, once across here. The 4th time, which is when I went back into the mountains in triple digit heat where my producers had no idea, literally the day of my surgery, I'm recovering in my room in UCLA, here in Westwood in California, in LA. And my producers are calling me like into a meeting at 9 p.m. at night. And I had surgery that morning. There was no sense of like boundaries. And I just kept showing up. And it wasn't that I didn't know how to say no, but I knew that the cost of saying no, because because my second of my 4 surgeries, I had 2 in 2011, 1 in 2012, 1 in 2016. My second one in 2012 was when my doctor said, you can't go back to work for it's between October and the holidays. And I remember when I came back from that, how people shamed me. And I was like, this isn't like you go out and you drink alcohol and now you cause some drunk driving, like whatever the application would be that was a negative cause and effect by your actions. This wasn't something one had done to then hurt others. This was happening to you. You somehow got this rare disease, somehow, and I remember when I was going through thyroid cancer, papillary thyroid cancer whether it was Hashimoto's, hyperthyroid, hypothyroid, like, yeah, it existed, but people weren't talking about it back then the way you hear of it today. And it's only a decade later, right?
Mm-hmm.
The conversation is so much greater. I can't begin to tell you how many women or people I've shared information with, or how many endocrinologists I had to go through to find the right ones, or where you get your lab work done or whatever. So the shame, I mean, I remember the first film I went back to do, and just, again, I think it's just like, it's kind of like, that's why there's diamonds in the rough, because the rough is rough and the diamonds shine bright. And you'd like to think that people are good to the core, but the truth is there's so many, sadly, people who don't do their own work, so they can end up taking all their and putting it on you. And here you are walking a path of light, or being this advocate, or being this person, whether you were working with the anti-defamation. I mean, come on, you're working with anti-defamation. It's like, most people be like, how do you spell that? Like clueless what anti-defamation even reflects and has to do with. And you're talking my language, and I talk about civics all the time, and like history, and how we don't want to repeat history, and yet here we are in current day, like, sadly, kind of in the midst of repeating history. That when I was a little girl sitting in Temple watching Holocaust movies, not because I said, can I watch another Holocaust movie? No, we were being put in place, and I didn't come up with a family who like survived the Holocaust, but I knew intellectually that history could repeat itself, which is why we were being taught this. So my point to that is choosing life, and choosing good people, and choosing to align, and choosing purpose. Like, you and I didn't know whether you were 29, or at the time I was 49 when I first was going through, this diagnosis. And I was perfectly healthy. Like, I mean, I've never once thought of myself as not being healthy, and I'm not being a denier. I'm like, I was just being Felicia, full of energy, blah, blah, blah. Went for my physical. If it weren't for my very smart internist, who, after doing all the things, we're sitting there talking, and he's like, what's up with your thyroid? And I was like, I don't know what's up with my thyroid. I wasn't goiterish or anything. Like, there was nothing bulbous. Bulbul is, sticking out of my neck. He's like, no, my sense is I need you to go get an ultrasound tonight.
Wow.
What? Yeah. And it was because of having really like special people around me amongst all the muck-a-muck. It's like swimming in a dark lake. You gotta find the right buoy. I have lots of visual illustrations, but that I thankfully aligned with, and I have had really masterful, smart people around me. But I'd like to think that that's a mirror, and I don't mean that in an egotistical way, because I was pre-med, and so science is very passionate, and I would have been a doctor had I been able to afford to stay in pre-med. And so I definitely am that healer, problem solver, get to the core issue. And it is interesting that all the things you talked about, so talking about things like having the intuition to preserve your eggs. When I started going through thyroid cancer, I realized I had been pregnant 5 times between the age of 32 to 46 naturally. I realized, especially my last 2 pregnancies with my husband, that, wow, this probably had maybe very plausibly something to do with my thyroid. And how many women don't know, based upon hormones and their thyroid, how their pregnancies or their lack thereof of successful, and let's just call it what it is. Here we are in 2023. We are so lucky to have the science advancements that we have in the medical world, which is why the pandemic and the naysayers and all that stuff are just like mind-blowing, because, you know, as you and I both know, it takes money to do research.
Mhm.
It takes money to solve these problems and to heal people. And for you and I to be alive talking to one another is because of science and research
Mhm.
and, a few finger crosses and a few knocks on wood and a few, like a lot of things that culminate into that collective. But it takes science and research to solve these problems. And when I think about like how medicine is and pregnancy is a miracle, and a woman getting through the pregnancy is a miracle, let alone conceiving is a miracle, and how, I don't know, I don't know if it's been living out in the West Coast or what, but I've come across, especially during those years, I came across so many women who were and men who were just like, yeah, well, we're just gonna get pregnant and blah 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 blah. And I'd be like, man, you have any idea? Like, by the grace of God, if you get pregnant and then you keep that pregnancy throughout, and that you come out alive and your baby comes out alive and healthy through it all. Because I was one of those women at 46 who naturally got pregnant, was having a very healthy pregnancy, 4 months in, genetically had to have the test because above 35, hopefully you have resources and access to this information. But never before had I had to go through that. And there we are, finding out in the middle of the test that we have to have another test. And we were just not prepared. Like, we were just like, we're happy, we're going along, but we're like, okay, all right, and we'll be right back, kind of thing. And they go to do this other test, and they're coming back and telling us that, there's an extra chromosome, and statistically speaking, that, in the third trimester with a case like this, that the baby could very easily die and cause you to die. And this is like all happening within a couple hours time of it's not even a couple hours. And you're just like processing all this information. And this is not being dramatic. This is being very matter of fact right now, what I'm sharing. And to say that people do not realize the delicate subject matters that this brings up and the layers this brings up, whether it's political right now with women's rights to their body and making decisions when it comes to women's health, let alone surviving, and what is not bound by, religious belief or people legislatively making decisions over your rights. It's called life or death.
Mhm.
And, we were even challenged through all of that. And I know this has nothing to do with the twisting on cancer and my going through ovarian cancer currently, and meaning recovery, but it all interrelates, because it comes down to using your voice, speaking up, advocating, all the things. Because when I did go through that, we went through that, I found that we had to what would have been the 9-month period of delivering our baby, our insurance company came back and accused us of an abortion and weren't going to cover the costs. And it was like, bringing up all this stuff again. And I literally had to write to an anonymous board saying, we're two people who are insured, represent this insurance in this industry, who wanted this child, who did not want to abort. It was a matter of life and death. It was based upon statistics and science and research and the information we were presented, why this decision was made. And yet here you are making a decision on two people's lives that you're accusing. And I mean, when our doctors found out, they all like stood up and wrote, reports, and they turned the case around based upon my standing up. And it inevitably helped other women that don't even know about what I did. And I'm not looking for this. More importantly, I was looking for like, how can you possibly be so insensitive? And this was now, 15 years ago, when it was legal to make these decisions. And there's all these kind of links to all this conversation because, again, you and I did not choose. Like, I remember when I was 29 and I was just newly getting married, living in Chicago, trying to pay back my school loans, trying to like launch my career successfully, remembering hormonally that I was like starting to get that feeling of wanting to have babies, whether or not we were going to move to LA, like when was that going to happen? Wars were about to happen. Like, there was just a lot of things consciously I was aware of and how it was affecting economics. And what people don't realize about openly talking about these journeys is it's not like you're here to go, whoa, me, talk about my journeys. No, it's a layered onion of how this affects people's lives. It's not just like, holy shit, you just got a diagnosis, you got a rare cancer disease, or you've got a life-threatening disease that if you're lucky enough to find out about it, you hope to God hasn't spread throughout your body, like an ovarian cancer. Most women find out that they didn't even know. Why? Because they've been told that what you're experiencing, no different than you when it came to your initial, like, oh, you just got the flu. Well, for me, it was like, oh, this is just what women go through. Leakage, go get those pads and those diapers. Are you kidding me right now? You cannot actually be talking to me and thinking that not only is this okay to say to me, but this is what you're saying to all women? Who in God's name do you think that, and these are, this was my medical team who is considered extraordinary. If this is what you're saying to women, this is not okay. And that was my comeback. If this is what you're saying to women, this is not okay. And I kept showing up going, this is not okay. And if it hadn't been for me coming back saying, this is not okay, this is not normal, this is not what I should be going through, I have no reason to have this happening to me physically. I have not delivered babies. I have not put on more weight to create a wall of collapse. I've Kegled my whole goddamn life. I mean, like, and people like, what did she say? What was that, Hebrew she just spoke? No, Kegel, like Kegel is something we should all know, men and women, right? Contract, hold, count, and then release. And, so like, this is why I do this podcast, by the way, because there's nothing I won't talk about. That's just how I feel. Like, it's just like, why don't you talk about it? And I've been like this since I was a kid. And that's what my friends used to say. Oh, Felicia will talk about it. She'll write those books. She'll tell it all. And I don't mean in a gossipy way, just like there are no barriers to this stuff, because why aren't we educating people and having these open conversations?
Yeah.
So yeah, I had none of that going on. And then, then a month into my leaking, just having little discharge and being like dumbfounded and being like, wow, what is this happening? I've just lost 53 pounds. I'm strong. I'm working out. I'm looking the best I've ever looked. I'm looking sexier at my age than I did at, in my teens. Like, what is happening? And then I start bleeding. Well, I shouldn't be bleeding because once I went through thyroid cancer and they took my thyroid out and put me through iodine radiation, well, that threw me into menopause when I wasn't even menopausal. And I was still hoping to get pregnant at 49, which to some might be like, Jesus, lady, stop already. But really, I mean, people have had healthy pregnancies. It's been proven time and time again, and I was healthy. So I thought, to be able, I mourned not being able to get pregnant more than going through cancer at the time, not knowing that radiation was going to potentially screw that up. So when I found out I had ovarian cancer and that, you know, now all my female organs were going to be taken out, I just remember being like, I remember, you know, mourning not being able to get pregnant. And then when I started bleeding during this more current time and being like, I haven't bled since February 2012, when my period finally stopped due to these other things. Again, this isn't a woe me. These are just facts. These are teachable moments for other people, men and women, to listen to, not because you want to hear it, because you probably don't. And probably a conversation like this, I feel like it's like, you know, when you talk about kinesiology, where people like are auditory or they're feely or they visual, it's like, this is when they go la, 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 la. But the perspective comes in. Now life has happened. And now I'm like, wait a minute. I remember when I heard that woman talking about that thing. And now my wife or my girlfriend or my mother, what was that she was talking about? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about it. Because my concern, I nearly use the word fear. My concern is that most women are being sent to pharmacies, or they're just quietly, because they're embarrassed and shamed, going to pharmacies, buying pads, buying diapers, buying whatever, when in fact they've been misdiagnosed or not diagnosed at all.
Yeah.
And they're dying.
Yeah.
And unnecessarily so. And this is why, and when I went public, back in December 7th, 2022, from my hospital room, because I had been, I've always, I mean, I grew up with parents, especially my mom, who surrounded us with the best of the best when it came to the medical field, as well as education and just life in general, to her ability. And so I knew how to surround and build teams around me and my family and advocate. And I knew that, you know, and I always reference this to like, God, if I just lived my whole life this way, I'd be like unstoppable. And maybe I am to most, but I know that in my own internal voice can sometimes be like, who do you think you are? Or, you know, you can't achieve what you achieved over here, which is not true. But my focus when it came to this and solving this problem was very like, get out of my way. No, it's not acceptable. Or this is what happens to women is not acceptable. And so, yes, when I was lucky enough to be aligned with my oncologist, after going through a series of bullshit over 4 months with my gynecologist, who, by the way, has been admirable up to that point, and he will remain nameless. And as I put it, and not proudly, pretty much, you know, and I never knew this term until surviving domestic violence in the late 90s, where I learned the term, you know, I can barely remember it because I'm so not street, but it's kind of like, what is it like, you know, not blowing somebody a new asshole, but it's something like, just like giving them, it's so unladylike, but it's really like schooling somebody, like, you know, unacceptable. And now I'm moving on. Mm-hmm. And I was lucky to be aligned with the oncology team that I was aligned with, who did save my life, who I aligned with at the right time, who, knock wood, you know, I will never, ever have to experience this ever again. But I was considered one of the lucky ones, you know, because when they open up a woman who, if they're lucky enough to get to an oncologist, you know, like you talked about the holiday, I literally was meeting my oncologist 2 days before Thanksgiving of this last year. I was lucky that this man said, bring her in after seeing my MRI. this was by my driving the cart that I was like, because a team on another hospital was going to see me, but was putting me off for like 6 weeks. And I was like, yeah, no, nobody's putting me off for 6 weeks. Most people, as you probably have learned or heard, or by hearing their stories, including our own, also know, and especially today, post-pandemic, when 35% of doctors retired during the pandemic, that is harder, more challenging for people. And most people never know how to go through. Most people aren't walking into an emergency room. Most people aren't seeing doctors actively, and most people don't know how to speak the language, let alone advocate. So they don't even, so they accept the information they've been given versus challenge it, like you and I sound like we have, and therefore are alive, I believe, because of it. And the difference that makes, and the importance of that showing up for yourself. And again, why I went public and I posted on Facebook. So my going public was all on social media, and my writing and going public this time around has all been on social media. I used to blog. I didn't have a blog at the time. I was told I should. It was more than I use this source. I videotape myself a lot and use this as like the kind of moment of sharing. But that going public was a real like moment of people just being like, what the heck? And I think whatever I said in the most authentic way was something that made people, I never felt shame. I felt I was able to help people who I, had concerns at the time, and people wanted to follow my journey. And my question to you is that, with Twist Out Cancer, and now you've got these years under your belt of creating this nonprofit, could you have imagined at 29 this being your journey, right? And now here we are, what, about 14, 15, 14, well, about, I don't know, 12 years later, since you're going through this, a decade later, where you sit with this nonprofit, what you've created, where do you see taking it the next 5, 10, 12 years? I mean, as you move on, and do you it's interesting, do you want to keep having this conversation?
Mm-hmm. Well, so I'll answer the first one. So no, I never envisioned this being my trajectory, like, at all. When I was going through treatment, I just wanted to survive the treatment. My life was broken up into small increments, right? So when I was going through treatment, it was moment to moment, day to day at best. And then as I started to get better, I could look a little ahead, maybe till next week, or maybe till next month. And then, as the years accumulated, I could look a year ahead, a couple years ahead, but always knowing there was a TBD next to it, right? And I still feel that way, right? So I don't have the same fears of relapse that I used to, which lasted, if I'm being honest about it, that it was like at the forefront of my mind, at least 5 years, 5, 6 years, where it was really a focus, where every scan, every appointment felt like the other shoe was going to drop,
Yeah.
But I think with time and space from the trauma, I've had other parts of my life that have really blossomed, that have been a wonderful distraction from what I experienced, right? I mean, I fell in love 3 months after I finished treatment, got married to my soulmate, and he's just the best of the best. And then had 2 children naturally, right? So, I mean, that in itself were miracles. And so I've been able to give a lot of attention to those things and focus less on my experiences, but I still worry, and I especially worry as a parent now, what if, right?
Mhm.
But in terms of twist, so I always said that I was going to do this for as long as it felt good to do and as long as I was helping other people. And at the 10-year mark, it's obviously a logical time to reflect and say, okay, I've been doing this for 10 years. Does it still feel good? And am
Yeah.
I impacting people? And the answer is yes. So one thing that I know about myself, and this has been consistent my whole life, is that I can get bored very easily, right? I mean, I just do. I have to creatively think of ways to reinvent whatever it is that I'm doing. I could work at the best job ever, right? But if I'm doing the same thing over and over for too long, I just get stagnant, right? So what has been interesting for me, and especially at the 10-year mark, is kind of rethinking the work that we do and figuring out how best to reach people and scale and reach more people than we've ever imagined reaching. And so those are fun, creative problems for me, and that continues to really energize me. The other thing I'll say, Felicia, is that as time has gone on, I do a lot less of these kinds of things because it's no longer centered on my story. So when I was building Twist, my story was at the heart of what we were doing. I founded the organization. It was because of the way that I handled it that was inspiring other people. But now that's not the case. We've been doing it now for 10 years. There's been 240,000 people impacted by the programs, which is a crazy amount. And so now there are thousands of stories out there floating that are impacting other people, that are causing ripple effects, are causing more people to open up, to participate in programs, or to, feel more confident coming forward and owning their stories. So to me, that is like huge success that, what I went through has helped to spark other people to be able to come forward. That is like the most beautiful takeaway, I think, from the whole experience for me. But when I think about like, where is Twist in 5 years or a decade from now, we're forming some really wonderful partnerships with hospitals and for-profits and nonprofits, bringing the programs that we've been doing now for a decade and bringing it into those spaces. And I think that's the most effective way for us to scale, as opposed to us just running everything ourselves, which is what we've been doing for a decade. And I think there's more of an appetite now for people to want these kind of programs and to be okay with it. And, I think a lot about like what COVID did in terms of changing the narrative of how we talk about our health. So there was such a stigma associated with mental health. We talk about what we do as providing psychosocial support to people touched by cancer. And really what that is that we are providing an opportunity for people to look after themselves and to take care of their mental health and to figure out what it is that they need, because the emotional impact of a cancer diagnosis is profound, not just on the individual, but on the whole inner orbit, on all the people that love you, right? So being okay talking about those things has really changed our ability to do the work. And I think there's more of an appetite for it now. Whereas before, when we were first starting, they were like, okay, art therapy, like, what's that? It's not, it's not so interesting. But I think now they're realizing that the arts can be used in so many different ways to get people to really own their story. And so we're seeing a real increase of interest in what we're doing. And so my hope is that we can continue to forge these really meaningful partnerships that will allow us to impact a lot more people.
Well, I love that. And it makes sense. First off, obviously, this being launched and your story being the catalyst to this whole movement, and how now over time, 240,000, I mean, 250,000 people.
That's crazy.
It's crazy. And you also said the layers, as I referred to it, the layered onion, the levels of how you as an individual, let alone everybody around you, are affected. I don't, I think our world is so detached that they don't even, they barely want to look at themselves in the mirror with good light, let alone getting contact with their emotions and their feelings and how that resonates and how that, how that affects them today, let alone tomorrow, let alone a year from now. And I think when you're talking about things like this, where you're, dissecting and you're cutting open, so to speak, a relative thing that most people, like 6 degrees of separation, are going to know or experience firsthand, this unfortunate disease, until we eradicate it, scientifically speaking. And that's the truth, and why research is so important. And women's health, sadly, is on the bottom of all of that trajectory. And being a pre-med kid in the 80s, I knew back then, and I love doctors, but I knew back then that research was being done on one category. And that was, no disrespect, but white men. Well, if we can heal ourselves, we can live forever. The rest, they'll figure it out. But we all know that that's just not the way it happens. It has to be through what we've already discussed 10 times over, research.
Not having ever met Jenna before and having this mutual friend, think that the two of us should be connected because of our journeys, is such an honor, because Jenna really has inspired me. Her story is really profound, and her actions are more profound, of how she took the power of her story and then put it on a dance floor. And from there touched all these people's lives to give them the space to open up and to share their stories, which is healing. And not only for, the individual, but the many people around who, have that 6th degree of separation. It's a profound conversation that continues into part 2 next week's drop, and that I look forward to you continuing to listen and gain perspective on these, ourselves, our journeys that, enlighten me, validate my experience, Jenna, having done that, and why the power of sharing is so important, no matter what you go through in life. And I learned that a long time ago, the relatableness and the connections that we all have, that our stories aren't different. You're just like plugging in different information. And, this just is a reminder of what one has the power to do if that is something that they want to do. And Jenna, being somebody who was already advocating for things, how she took her power forward. And this is why sharing these stories and sharing individuals like Jenna, to me, is so cool, because I love being able to share these individuals who are doing amazing things and changing lives, and I hope that and understand why gathering around the campfire is so important to us, to share these stories and to understand, why we've taken the position where the spirit is young, the soul is wise, and the life stories are vast, and where, talking about everything from soup to nuts, or what we like to say, from cannoli, egg in the holes, and don't forget the s'mores, is all about just us sitting around having these enlightening moments that can teach and raise people up and make a difference in their lives. Much love. Have a great week. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing us. Thank you for being a part of this community. And look forward to part 2, episode 28 next week. Bye for now.